The record begins with a sound. Not an explosion, not a weapon discharge, not the scream of a hull under pressure. Just a sound, soft, rhythmic, almost gentle, that the intelligence officer of the Dominion warship Inexorable Consequence could not identify and could not stop hearing. It was coming from the captured human. The human was seated, restrained, uninjured by every measurable standard, and yet it was producing that sound from somewhere in its chest cavity, a low, continuous vibration that the ship's acoustic sensors flagged 3 times as a potential communication signal before the analyst team overrode the classification. It wasn't communication. The translation algorithms had already confirmed that. What it was, no one could say. The intelligence officer, Velsarath of the 3rd Analytical Division, watched the human through the observation glass and felt something she had not experienced since her early training simulations. Genuine uncertainty about what she was looking at. The human met her eyes through the glass. It smiled. Then it went back to making the sound. The Dominion Armada had entered what the navigational charts designated as Contested Zone 7, human space, by the species' own insistence, though the claim had never been formally recognized by the Interstellar Governance Assembly. This was a bureaucratic distinction the Dominion's Strategic Command had used to justify the operation. If the zone was contested, no sovereignty was being violated. If no sovereignty was being violated, no war was being declared. If no war was being declared, the 41 ships of the First Punitive Armada could simply proceed, demonstrate overwhelming force, and allow the humans to draw the appropriate conclusions. It was, on paper, an elegant solution. The humans had destroyed a Dominion monitoring installation 3 months prior. Not in battle, there had been no exchange of fire. The installation had simply ceased transmitting. When a recovery vessel was dispatched, it found the station structurally intact, all systems intact, all supplies intact. Every single crew member was gone. No bodies, no distress signals, no record of what had happened in the final 6 hours before silence. The Assembly had debated the incident for 11 weeks. The Dominion had waited 4 days, and then began loading the Armada. Velsarath had read the incident report 17 times. Each reading left her with the same 3 questions, none of which her superiors seemed to find particularly interesting. First, how had the humans removed 11 crew members from a sealed, pressurized station without triggering a single alarm? Second, why had they taken the crew at all? If the goal was to destroy the installation, bodies were irrelevant. If the goal was to take hostages, there had been no subsequent communication. Third, and this was the one that kept surfacing at the edge of her sleep cycles, why had the humans left everything else completely undamaged? The equipment, the supplies, the data cores, which contained navigational information that would have been tactically valuable. They had taken nothing except people. She had written a formal analytical note suggesting the incident warranted deeper investigation before military action. The note had been acknowledged, filed, and ignored. The Armada departed on schedule. "You know what I find strange," said Commander Prethavel, dropping into the seat across from Velsarath in the officer's analysis bay. He was young for his rank, sharp-featured, deeply confident in the way that people are confident when nothing has yet gone wrong for them. "The humans knew we were coming. They've had 3 months, and there's nothing out there." Velsarath looked up from her display. "Define nothing." "No fleet mobilization, no defensive positioning. Our long-range sensors have been sweeping human space for 48 hours. No weapons platforms, no military vessels moving to intercept." He leaned back, satisfied. "They know they can't match us. Classic capitulation behavior. They'll protest formally, demand negotiation, delay as long as possible, and eventually concede the zone." "That's one interpretation," Velsarath said. "What's yours?" She looked back at her display. "I don't have one yet." It wasn't entirely true. She had fragments of something. shapes that didn't fit together into a coherent picture but felt, collectively, wrong. The missing crew, the intact station, the silence on human channels since the Armada's departure when she would have expected frantic diplomatic traffic. The human they'd picked up 3 days ago near the zone border, a single shuttle, drifting, no engine signature, as if it had been placed there rather than traveling there, whose pilot had offered no resistance, surrendered immediately, and then sat in the holding cell making that sound. She pulled up the acoustic file again, played it at low volume. Prethavel frowned, still trying to classify that. The computer says it's involuntary, a stress vocalization. So the human is afraid. The computer says that too. Velsarith paused the file, but it keeps smiling. The first ship went dark at 3:40 ship time on the 6th day of transit. The asterisk measured patience asterisk, a mid-range tactical vessel positioned at the Armada's left flank, simply stopped responding. No distress signal, no final transmission. Sensor data from neighboring ships showed it continuing on its heading for approximately 90 seconds after the last communication, and then nothing. No explosion, no debris field. The ship was there, and then it registered as an absence. The Armada-wide alert lasted 6 minutes before Strategic Command reclassified it as a probable equipment failure. The asterisk measured patience was an older vessel. Communication relays were known to be unreliable at extended range. A retrieval order was issued and then quietly deprioritized when no other ships reported anomalies. Velsarith filed a second analytical note. This one was not acknowledged. She began spending more time with the human. His name, according to his identification documents, was Marcus Ockafer, and he held what appeared to be a civilian research designation from something called the University of New Carthage. His file described him as a xenobiologist. He was 41 years old by human reckoning, brown-skinned, with close-cropped hair that had begun graying at the temples. He sat in his cell with the particular stillness of someone who has decided that stillness is the most efficient available option, and he watched Velsarith through the observation glass with an expression she couldn't categorize. On the 8th day, she pressed the communication toggle. "You're not afraid," she said. The human considered this for a moment. "I didn't say that." The stress vocalization is exactly what your computer said it is. He tilted his head slightly. "That doesn't mean I'm not managing it." Velsarith studied him. "You knew we were coming. Everyone knew you were coming. You're not subtle. And you prepared nothing." Marcus Ockafer looked at her with an expression that took her 3 full seconds to identify, because she had not expected to see it on the face of someone in a holding cell surrounded by 41 warships. The expression was patience. Deep, settled, entirely unhurried patience. "I didn't say that either," he said. The second ship went dark on day 9. The third and fourth on day 11, within 4 hours of each other. By this point, Strategic Command could no longer maintain the equipment failure classification, and the Armada's formation tightened into a defensive configuration that slowed their transit speed considerably. The ships that went dark shared no obvious pattern. Different classes, different positions in the formation, different crew complements, different ages. The only commonality Velsarith could identify after 3 days of cross-referencing was that each had been among the vessels that swept their sensors most aggressively across human space in the preceding 48 hours. She brought this finding to Commander Prethavel. He stared at her report. "You're saying they went dark because they were looking too hard." "I'm saying they went dark after looking too hard. I'm not saying I know the mechanism." He stopped, recalibrated. "That doesn't make tactical sense. If you want to hide something, you don't punish the people who find it. You hide it better." "Unless," Velsarith said carefully, "the point isn't concealment." Prethavel looked at her. "What's the point?" She didn't answer because she wasn't certain. But the shape of the thing was becoming clearer to her, in the way that a predator becomes clear in dense undergrowth, not by seeing it whole, but by noticing the places where the undergrowth is perfectly still. She went back to Marcus Accafer. "The ships that disappeared," she said without preamble, "you know what happened to them." The human was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know roughly what happened to them. I don't know the specifics. I'm not military." "Tell me what you know." "I know," Marcus said slowly, "that you came into our space looking for a demonstration of force, and I know that we're very good at giving people what they're looking for." Velsarith felt a cold, precise sensation travel from the base of her spine to the top of her skull. "That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I have." She leaned closer to the glass. "The crew of the monitoring station, where are they?" Marcus Accafer's expression shifted into something she couldn't read at all. "Safe," he said. "They're guests. We take good care of guests." "You took them without their consent." "We took them without triggering your alarms. That's different." He paused. "Your crew knew what they were monitoring. They knew they were watching our border. They knew that was a provocation. And when we made our feelings known about that, we made absolutely certain that no one got hurt." Something in his voice changed, not harder but more deliberate. "That was a choice we made. We could have sent a different message." The cold sensation sharpened. "You wanted us to know," Velsarith said, "that you could have hurt them." "We wanted you to know," Marcus said, "that we chose not to." This is the moment. Though Velsarith would not understand its full significance until much later, when she was reviewing the complete record with shaking hands in a debriefing room, where the first misinterpretation fully calcified. Strategic Command had understood the message of the missing crew as a statement of capability. Look what we can do. Look how silently we can move. What they had not understood, what no one in the Dominion's analytical hierarchy had considered, because it would have required a fundamentally different model of how minds worked, was that the message was not about capability at all. It was about restraint. And restraint in human moral architecture is not the absence of violence. It is violence acknowledged, chosen against, and offered as a gift. The Dominion had received the gift and mistaken it for a threat display. Velsarith began to suspect this on day 12. She did not yet understand the full shape of the error. The fifth ship went dark, then the sixth. On day 14, Strategic Command made a decision that Velsarith would later describe, in her official testimony, as the most consequential and least considered action of the entire engagement. They activated the Armada's full-spectrum jamming array. The logic was reasonable, from within the framework of Dominion tactical doctrine. If the disappearing ships were being targeted through their sensor emissions, then eliminating all external communication and scanning would deny the humans whatever mechanism they were using. The Armada would go dark voluntarily before the humans could do it to them. What no one in Strategic Command considered was that going dark is not the same as becoming invisible. And what none of the tactical analysts had modeled was the possibility that the jamming array itself, the specific frequency signature it produced, the particular interference pattern it cast across local space, had already been mapped, had in fact been the signal the humans were waiting for. Velsarith was in the observation bay when the alert lights shifted from amber to red throughout the ship. She was not looking at Marcus Accafer. She was looking at the sensor feeds, watching the jamming array's status indicators climb toward full activation. She heard Marcus say quietly from behind the glass, "There it is." She spun around. He was standing now, the first time she had seen him stand, and he was not looking at her. He was looking at the ceiling as if he could see through it to the space beyond. "What?" she said. "What is?" "I need you to listen to me," Marcus said, and his voice had changed entirely. The patience was still there, but underneath it now was something urgent and careful, the tone of a person who is about to say something they need said exactly right. "What happens next is going to look like an attack. It is not an attack. Do you understand the difference? No, Velsarith said honestly. An attack is designed to destroy. What's about to happen is designed to stop. He met her eyes through the glass. There's a significant difference. I need you to remember that difference. In the next 20 minutes, it's going to be very hard to remember. The alert lights shifted again. The ship's hull vibrated, not from an impact but from something else, something Velsarith had no classification for, a resonance that felt like the asterisk inexorable consequence itself was being read. How many of your people, she said, are out there right now? Marcus smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn on day one, and now she understood it was not satisfaction or cruelty or even confidence in the conventional sense. It was something deeper and stranger than any of those things. All of them, he said. Here is what Velsarith did not know, and what the complete record, assembled over the subsequent 4 years from recovered data, survivor testimony, and translated human communications, eventually revealed. 3 months earlier, on the same day the Dominion Strategic Command began loading the Armada, the human government body known as the Emergency Defense Council had convened an extraordinary session that lasted 31 hours without recess. The session was not to debate military response. The decision for military response had already been made in the first hour. The remaining 30 hours were spent on a single question. How do you stop a war before it begins, when the other side has already decided to start one? The answer they arrived at was not a strategy in the conventional sense. It was a philosophy operationalized, and it required something that no Dominion analyst had included in any behavioral model, because it was not a behavior the Dominion had ever observed in a spacefaring civilization at this scale. It required the humans to be willing to lose first. The Armada's crossing of human space had been anticipated. The sensor sweeps had been anticipated. The likely activation of the jamming array had been anticipated. And each of these anticipated events had been prepared for, not to prevent them, but to use them. Every aggressive Dominion action was a brush stroke the humans were adding to a picture the Dominion couldn't see yet. Marcus Acaffer was not a researcher who happened to be in the wrong place. He was a xenobiologist who had spent 11 years studying Dominion cultural psychology, with a specific focus on how Dominion decision-makers processed information. His presence on that drifting shuttle had been deliberate. His surrender had been deliberate. The acoustic vocalization had been deliberate. It was not a stress response. It was a signal, transmitted on biological frequencies that Dominion sensors would flag as involuntary, because Dominion biology did not include voluntary resonance structures. He had been broadcasting location data since day one. Not the Armada's location. The Armada knew its own location. He had been broadcasting his own location, continuously updated, so that at no point in the 14 days since his capture had the humans lost track of exactly where within the Armada he was. Because in human tactical doctrine, not military doctrine, not strategic doctrine, but the deeper cultural logic that shaped all of those things, you do not leave your people behind. And more importantly, when the humans moved, they moved around the location of their own person first. Every ship that had gone dark because a human team had determined, with Marcus's position confirmed, that they could approach that vessel, neutralize it without casualties, and withdraw before the Armada's sensor net could respond. The tightening formation had not made this harder. It had made it easier because the humans had already mapped every sensor gap in the formation during the first 6 days, when the ships were spread wide. The jamming array's activation was the last piece. It told the human commanders, in absolute clarity, that the Armada was no longer looking outward, that the pattern of defensive panic had reached its terminal point. It was, in human military language, the signal to converge. In the 20 minutes following activation, 9 more Dominion vessels went dark. Velsareth braced herself against the observation bay wall as the ship vibrated again, deeper this time, more sustained, not a resonance but something like a heartbeat felt through the deck. Alarms she had no names for were cycling through the corridor. She could hear officers shouting in the command sections above her, the sharp declarative vocabulary of people who are certain they are under attack and looking for the thing to shoot back at. "They're not going to find anything," Marcus said. He had sat back down. His voice was steady in a way that she realized, with a lurch of something close to vertigo, was genuine, not performed composure, not suppressed fear. He was actually currently calm. "Your weapons systems are looking for ships. You're not going to find ships." "What are we going to find?" "People," he said simply. "Individuals, small teams. They're on your hulls right now, and they've been there since before you activated the array, and they're wearing equipment that your sensors classify as hull debris because it's made from materials your sensors associate with hull debris." He paused. "One of the things your people didn't understand about the monitoring station is that we didn't need to bring anything with us. We built everything we needed from what was already there." Velsareth stared at him. "You boarded us." "We're boarding the entire armada," Marcus said, simultaneously. The corridor outside went briefly, completely silent. "No," Velsareth said, because she could not make herself believe the scale of it. "That's you'd need." 41 teams, Marcus said. 1 per ship. Average team size is 6, so roughly 250 people total across the entire armada. He tilted his head. "It sounds like a small number, I know, but you've been looking for a fleet, looking for something that fights the way you fight. And the thing about building your whole military doctrine around the assumption that battles are fought with fleets is that you stop hardening your ships against 6 people with the right tools and no particular interest in dying quickly." The "no particular interest in dying quickly." Velsareth turned that phrase over in her mind and felt something she could not name. "They might die," she said. "Your people on those ships, if your boarding teams are discovered." "Some of them might," Marcus said. The steadiness in his voice did not waver, and this, more than anything else, was what finally crossed the boundary between unsettling and genuinely terrifying. "We know that. They know that. They volunteered." "For what? What is the goal here?" Her voice was harder than she intended. "You can disable the armada. You cannot defeat the Dominion. There will be another armada. There will be." "We know that too." Marcus met her eyes. "We're not trying to win a war, we're trying to stop one from starting." The full picture assembled itself in Velsareth's mind over the next 6 minutes, the way a star pattern becomes a recognized constellation, each point of light suddenly making sense as part of a shape that was always there. The humans hadn't built a defense, they had built a demonstration. Every action since the monitoring station had been calculated not for military victory, but for a specific psychological target. The moment when Dominion Strategic Command would have to ask itself a question it had never asked about any species before. Not can we defeat them, but what are they? Because the species that had emptied an installation without casualties, without alarms, without taking anything except people, and then returned those people as guests. The species that had followed an armada of 41 warships into its own territory and systematically, silently boarded them all with teams of 6, not to destroy, but to demonstrate that destruction was a choice they were continuously, deliberately declining to make. This species was not playing the game that the Dominion knew how to play. And a species that doesn't play your game cannot be defeated by your rules. "You're going to let us go," Velsareth said. It was not a question. "Every ship, every crew member, completely unharmed." Marcus held her gaze. "With full records of everything that happened, including my transmissions which your communications team has been trying to decode for 2 weeks. A brief, complicated expression crossed his face. "They're not encoded. I wasn't transmitting data. I was transmitting something your linguistics teams will eventually classify as music." Velsarath went absolutely still. Why music? Because data can be dismissed as a malfunction. Because data suggests we were sneaking. He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was different, quieter, and somehow older. Because I have been sitting in this cell for 14 days, and I have been afraid, and I chose to sing, and I wanted whoever was listening to understand that a species that chooses to sing when it's afraid is not a species that is going to run out of reasons to keep going. The ship's alarms went silent, all of them at once. In the sudden quiet, Velsarath could hear it, faint through the walls, barely audible from somewhere in the hull of the inexorable consequence the same sound she had heard from Marcus on day 1. The same low, rhythmic vibration, the same impossible steadiness. Coming from somewhere outside the holding bay. One of the boarders. Still there, still singing. The official after-action report filed by the Dominion Strategic Command described the incident as a tactical withdrawal following system, anomalies consistent with human electronic warfare capabilities. This language was chosen with great care by people who were deeply aware that what had actually happened could not be allowed to appear in any document accessible to other civilizations. The real assessment, the internal one, triple classified, seen by 7 officials, all of whom subsequently requested reassignment away from any department responsible for human affairs, was significantly shorter. It said, "We do not understand what happened. We understand less now than we did before we sent the Armada. Our current threat models are not applicable to this species. Request immediate suspension of all active operations in contested Zone 7 pending complete reassessment of human behavioral parameters." The request was granted in 30 minutes, a new record for the approval of a strategic command suspension. Velsarath was not among the 7 who read the internal assessment. She was debriefed separately, at length, and her testimony was the longest and the most carefully scrutinized. At one point, the reviewing committee asked her to describe, in precise terms, what she believed the humans had been trying to communicate. She was quiet for a long time before she answered. "They were trying to communicate," she said finally, "that they are not fighting to win. They are fighting to remain the species that chooses not to destroy what it could destroy." She paused. "I don't think the Dominion has ever encountered that before. I don't think we had a category for it. We kept trying to find the strategy underneath the restraint, the real move they were setting up, the deception behind the mercy." She stopped again, and when she continued her voice was careful and strange. "I eventually concluded that there is no move underneath. The restraint is the strategy. They have decided at some foundational level that the kind of species they are matters more to them than whether they win. And because they have decided that, because they genuinely believe it, it means they will accept costs that we would never accept. It means they will go further than we will go, suffer more than we will suffer, risk more than we will risk, specifically so they do not have to become something else." One of the committee members leaned forward. "You make that sound like a virtue." "I make it sound," Velsarath said, "like the thing that keeps me awake." Marcus Akafer was released on day 16. His shuttle, repaired, refueled, and resupplied by the crew of the inexorable consequence under guidelines he had not requested and could not refuse, because the guidelines came directly from Velsarath and carried her full analytical authority, was cleared from the Armada's formation and given an uncontested path back to human space. He did not go directly to human space. He drifted for a while in the zone between, in the particular silence that only exists between stars, and he sat in the quiet of his own shuttle and listened to his own heart, which was not quite steady, because he was a xenobiologist and not a soldier, and 14 days of being very carefully, very deliberately unafraid had cost him something real. His hands shook for a while. He let them. Then he put on music, not the kind he'd been broadcasting, not the navigational signal, just music, his own music, a specific piece he'd been saving for the moment he was alone enough to let himself feel what the last 2 weeks had actually been, and he sat with it until his hand stopped. He filed his report 3 days later. It was thorough, technically precise, and emotionally calibrated in the particular way that Dominion analytical bureaucracies would find most credible. It described the jamming array's frequency signature and the confirmation mechanism in detail. It described the boarding team's approach trajectories, the hull material camouflage, the coordination timing. It described Velsarath, her intelligence, her persistence, her refusal to accept the comfortable explanations her superiors offered, the quality of the uncertainty she was willing to sit with. In the final section, he wrote a single paragraph that his department head tried twice to redact and was overruled both times. It said, "We should not be proud of this. We should be honest about what it cost. 250 people spent 16 days in contact with alien hull surfaces in conditions that left several of them with permanent physiological damage. We achieved our objective without killing anyone, which is what we set out to do, and the price of that was asking our own people to absorb harm rather than cause it. That is the correct trade. I would make it again." I want to be clear that making it again is not the same as finding it easy, and that any civilization that finds that trade easy has made a mistake about what civilizations are for. The paragraph was read in translation by 4 members of the Dominion's Internal Analysis Division. 3 of them found it strategically incomprehensible. The 4th, a junior analyst named Savorath, 22 years into her first posting, who had grown up in a border province and had opinions about centralized power that she kept carefully private, read it 6 times. She kept a copy. She would think about it on and off for the rest of her career. The galaxy, in the years that followed, developed several competing theories about what had happened when the Armada entered human space and went silent. Some concluded that the humans had demonstrated a superior technology they were concealing. This theory was popular because it was legible. It fit existing frameworks. It answered the question in familiar terms, and it implied that the problem was merely technical, solvable with sufficient research and reverse engineering. Some concluded that the humans had been extraordinarily lucky. This theory was popular for different reasons. A minority of analysts, working in isolated pockets across 4 different civilizations with no knowledge of each other, arrived at a third conclusion. Their papers, when eventually gathered and compared, used different languages and different frameworks and different mathematical models, but they reached the same place. They concluded that the humans had done something that no dominant spacefaring civilization had previously done on a large scale, which was to decide, collectively and deliberately, that what they were willing to endure mattered more than what they were capable of inflicting. They concluded that this decision was not tactical. It was not philosophical in the abstract sense. It was structural, written into the way humans organized themselves, the way they trained their people, the stories they told about what it meant to succeed, the specific content of what Marcus Acaffer sang in a holding cell for 14 days. They concluded that this made humanity the most dangerous presence in the inhabited galaxy. Not because humans were powerful. Power was measurable. Power could be countered with sufficient equivalent power. No, because a species that has decided what it will not do and has genuinely meant it, and has built that decision into the marrow of how it teaches its children, and remembers its dead, and chooses its leaders. That species does not fight until it is defeated. It fights until it has become something it cannot live with being. And as long as it has not yet become that thing, as long as that line is still somewhere ahead of it, it does not stop. Velsarath retired from the Dominion Analytical Division 14 years after the Armada incident. She moved to a border province. She grew things in soil. She was not, by any metric her former colleagues would have recognized, important. She received 3 years into her retirement a package with no return address. Inside was a single data chip. On the chip was an audio file. She played it without knowing what it was. It was Marcus Acker's voice, a field recording from some kind of natural environment, wind audible in the background. He was not speaking. He was singing. Not the navigational signal, not the biological broadcast, just a human voice doing what human voices do when there is no tactical reason to and every personal reason to. At the end of the recording, there was a single spoken sentence. It was in her language. The accent was imperfect in the specific ways that come from learning something from books rather than from other speakers, which meant he had learned it alone, which meant he had decided to do something for which he had no audience and no confirmation it would ever matter. He said, "Thank you for listening carefully. Most people don't." She played the recording again. Then again. She sat in the growing dark of her provincial evening, and she thought about what it means to be the species that sings when it is afraid, not because the song changes anything, not because anyone who matters is listening, but because the singing is itself the proof of something that cannot be measured or modeled or entered into a threat assessment. The proof that something in there is still alive, still choosing, still against every rational expectation here.